Good evening, everybody. My name's Lyneth Crighton. For those people who have not met me before, I work at Brescia House School. I'm in charge of all the innovation and staff development at our school. We're a Microsoft Showcase school, and we participate in the Microsoft Innovative Educator program as well as all our teachers do the Microsoft Certified Educator exam. So the presentation tonight that I'm giving you is an adaptation of what I have presented to teachers at my school over the past 3 years. Your microphones and cameras should be able to be unmuted and switched on. I just ask that if you could keep them muted until we get to the part where we can have a bit of discussion around the questions, and then you're welcome to either talk via microphone or type in the chat. If you have any questions, please just pop them in the chat, or if you can just wait for when we get to the end of a section, then feel free to ask them, put up your hand. I just want to confirm if you could just send me some reactions that you can all see the screen and you can all hear me. Okay, great. Okay, I am going to talk an awful lot this evening. Hopefully when we get to the participation, you get a chance to ask your questions and argue your points. This usually we do in 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours with the teachers at Brescia. So in an hour and a half, it's a quick overview of what is required for the Microsoft Certified Educator exam, which is based on Microsoft's 21st Century Learning Framework, which the first place to start is to have created an account on Microsoft Learn and then look for the 21st Century Learning Design pathway and then to do all the modules attached to it. At Brescia, currently there are 60 of the teachers, of the 78 teachers who are certified with the exam over the past 3 years, and then there's another bunch, a whole lot of teachers to write in July, which I hope you will consider doing or have already registered to do on the sponsored vouchers from Microsoft. So to explain what Microsoft's 21st Century Learning Framework is and where it comes from, I'm just going to play the video. It is available in that pathway. Becky Keane explains where Microsoft took the ideas from and how they developed their learning framework. Please just let me know if there is no sound when I push play on the video.
Lyneth, you are muted.
Sorry. In our school, we have done extensive training with the Microsoft certified educators. As I said earlier, we have 60 teachers who are already certified, and there's about another 18 to write the exams before the end of July. And I can tell you that it does change your way of thinking. It changes a staff's way of thinking, as it is about how you design a project, how you go about creating projects and topics and lessons that create the opportunities to learn 21st century skills. Sorry, I just need to send somebody the link. Sorry about that. So I really do think that this is an amazing platform to change the conversations in schools, to change the why we do things and the way that we do things. As Becky spoke about, it is based on 6 dimensions, which are each have a corresponding rubric. So as we're going to come back to at the end, part of this course is the preparation for the exam. The exam focuses on these 6 rubrics and the why we do things and how we can include these 21st century skills in our projects that we design, or topics, or the things we do with the learners in our classrooms. It is not so much about the end tool, though there are questions around if you include Minecraft or you use a OneNote. The basis is all pedagogy and about 21st century skills and these rubrics. These rubrics are available as they stand, the Word versions of these rubrics, when you write the exam in the case studies section. You can find the information and the rubrics in the learning course. They have all the information. They also have a link to the OneNote, which includes information regarding each dimension and questions and anchor lessons. So what I'm going to cover quickly is the 6 dimensions, and I'm going to go through them. Please note these are not Microsoft resources. These are how I have taken the information from the learning pathway on Microsoft Learn, the OneNote, my experience in the 3 years of teaching and teachers and training teachers, and watching countless exams online. So it's just how I have put it in my brain. I'm a very visual learner, so I like colors and pictures to help me remember and cement ideas. So I hope you find it useful. So the first dimension for me is one of the most important dimensions, which is knowledge construction. It is developing critical thinking skills. Uh, I do have a daughter in matric and a son in grade 8. And for me, if I think of when I became a teacher, or 15 years ago when I went to Brescia, or in fact, when I was in high school, the difference is that what you know is no longer the currency. It's what you do with what you know. anybody can Google anything. Anybody can say, hey Siri, or hey, okay Google, and get answers to facts. So the most important, sorry, I have every device telling me they don't understand because I'm saying all these keywords. So the most important thing is that we understand that what we teach, which is just a vehicle in which to get the learners to develop these crucial skills. But as you can see from the two pictures, school hasn't changed much in over 150 years, but yet the classes of grade R's that start next year matriculate in 2035, and babies that were born last year matriculate in 2040, and that's closer than 1980. So it is really important that we change the way we do things. So in the dimensions, there are a couple of main big ideas, and then there is the rubric, which I've redone onto an infographic sheet. So the way knowledge construction works is that you ask the question of your project or your set of learning lessons or whatever you're trying to achieve. And the first question within this rubric is, does your project require knowledge construction? And knowledge construction, those of us who are high school matric teachers will know about Bloom's or Tim's or whichever framework where you choose higher order. It's all about those higher order ideas of interpreting, analyzing, synthesizing, or evaluating. In other words, it's not just telling you something that they've learned out of a textbook. They're interpreting it or analyzing it or evaluating it. So the very first question is, does the project you're working with or set of lessons require knowledge construction? And the way they work is, if the answer is yes, it moves to a level 2. If the answer is no, it stays a level 1. The idea with the 6 rubrics is not that every project meets the top level of every rubric. The idea is that over a year of work that you try by covering all the 6 dimensions, and by understanding how they work and how they what the different levels are, that you can change the level of your project to make it more valid in knowledge construction. So after asking, does it require knowledge construction? In other words, do they have to interpret or analyze something? The second question is it the main requirement? Is it the main idea? In other words, is it the most effort, time, most marks in what you're doing? If it's not, it would stay as a level 2. If it was, it goes to a level 3, and you ask the next question. Are they applying their knowledge in a new context? So not just applying it with a different set of data, okay? Or using it, the knowledge they've got, and presenting it to you within some ICT integrated way. For example, if you're teaching them about an elephant, if they're just making a poster or a PowerPoint presentation about an elephant, there's no knowledge construction in that. They are just taking what they know or they can research and putting it digitally or on paper. So it's about, can they take what they know and apply it in a different situation, in some new context that relies on them knowing the information, but either interpreting or evaluating the information that they know to see which applies in this case. And then the last question which is something that we don't generally do in schools, is it interdisciplinary? Now, in Microsoft's rubric for knowledge construction, interdisciplinary is about cross-curricular, cross-subjects, life sciences and business studies working together, and that both have components and then both are marked. In our school, we now, in the third term of grade 9, our grade 9s do modules where we have what we call 21 CLD projects, where we've created interdisciplinary projects. So, for example, business and IT work together, and they create a project where they have to take a bankrupt building site where they were going to build a set of townhouses. And from the business point of view, they look at all the books and business management and what accounting practices and those things from EMS that they need. And then from IT, they learn CAD and they do floor plans and drawings of the houses and make flyers and advertising material to create this campaign for what they would do to present with this piece of land if they took over from the company. So that's interdisciplinary. It has two components measured against EMS and IT, or we have ones that have music and science have done a music project where they've studied sound waves and then made instruments and graphed the sound waves. And then, so those kind of interdisciplinary activities, as you can tell, and that would make it a level 5, we don't often have the time to spend doing those kind of projects. But it is important that they do them at least once. So if we go back to Microsoft's rubric, as you can see, it's a whole lot of words. There are important things to note about the words that are in capital letters and the words that are in bold. So, for example, level 1 says the activity does not require the learners to construct knowledge, and level 5 is it's the main requirement is knowledge construction. They have to apply their knowledge in a new context, and the learning goals have to cover more than one subject. So that's how the rubric works. And obviously, wherever you stop answering the questions is the level that you stop on. And the idea being is that the next time you do a project with knowledge construction, you try and push the level a little bit higher so that the learners get the much needed 21st century skill of knowledge construction. So in the exam, the Microsoft Certified Educator exam, a knowledge construction question looks similar to the following. Please note these are amended a little bit from the actual questions, but they are based on questions that are in the current exam. So this is when you get to either unmute yourself or hop onto the chat. So here's a tip for the exam. Go find the question. What are they actually asking instead of just reading all the words? So if you look at this question, what they're actually asking is which learning activity requires the students to apply their knowledge in a new context. So when you've done this a while, you know that if you look at the rubric, that would be a level 4. So in your head, sorry, I'm reading a question. Is there any type of writing that will be assessed as part of the task considering interdisciplinary with language? I'm not sure I could understand. understand your question, Anel. Do you want to take your microphone off mute and just explain it?
Yes. Hi, Lyneth. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So what I'm saying is up to what point, because most of the time there's a component of writing or perhaps language involved in any type of task or activity. But how much of it should be present or assessed for it to count as being interdisciplinary in terms of we're assessing language and we're also assessing another subject area? Do you understand?
Okay, so I had an Afrikaans teacher recently. There's one of the Afrikaans teachers at Brescia who's currently doing this. And the thing about interdisciplinary is that each subject basically chooses their learning goals and then would assess on that, but it would collectively work together. So let's just say you were doing, and because I invigilated grade 11 exams today, English exams, and my daughter wrote one, a matric one, is that, so let's just say if we go back to that project of the business, but if English had a hand in it, where the advert that they created would have been marked for a literacy, visual literacy, and what would be in an advert from an English point of view, it would get a mark. So it's really as much as each subject requires is how much writing versus assessment so that you would need. So it doesn't mean that, it just means the effort and the marks is about knowledge construction. And I'm going to use an example of a very long time ago that I went to a SchoolNet conference, and there was a person from Australia who talked about the poem, one of the poems, and they actually made the children in their class create a visual representation of that poem. And they could do it in any which way they liked. And in those days, the gaming platform was not Fortnite, and PowerPoint was not as powerful, and there was no such thing as Canva. But his whole idea was that the child studied the poem and then visually represented it, and then he would show the video or the game or the presentation the first time, and the second time he'd stop it at any point of view, and then he'd ask the person questions. And I remember not the name of the poem, but the poem talks about a door, and then he talked about the child who he would stop the presentation and say, why did you choose that door? How does it represent what you know in the poem? That is knowledge construction. In other words, can you take and represent it? So there were no words in that project, but it was the understanding of completely of the poem. So it would be with interdisciplinary, it would be more about whatever goal you're trying to achieve in your two subjects. So the science and music one, the science was trying to teach sound waves and how to measure sound waves. So every task they did that was assessed for science covered what they would usually do, but not in an interdisciplinary project. They just put it in the bus called the music project. So for me, 21st century is like the car that you drive the knowledge in. The knowledge is, or the content of the people inside, and the wheels and the steering wheel and what color the car is, all depends on what you as the teacher and what subjects there are. Am I making sense, or am I talking strangely? Does that sort of answer?
Yes, I get the point. Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure. So if we go back to the question, they're asking what is a new context. So if you read the whole story, it is that they've taught them the water cycle. So is using Minecraft to recreate the water cycle a different context, or is it just a different platform? Is using a diagram in PowerPoint to show the water cycle a different context? If you're interviewing a local expert in water systems, is that applying your knowledge in a different context? And creating an interactive presentation of how water cycles through the environment. So I just want to tell you that none of the exams is there any memo. So when you write an exam, these exams at the end, you get a score out of 1,000 and you get so many points, you need 700 of them. Each question, I think, is weighted because we've had people who finished and not quite finished pass, and people who think they've aced it not do as well as they thought. So I can't tell you what the actual answer is. If there anybody in the chat who would like to guess or put their 2 cents worth whether they think it's A, B, C, or D. So remember, it's about understanding the concept of a water cycle and then doing it somewhat different. So for me, C, where you interview a local expert in the water systems, means you have to have knowledge of water cycles so that you can ask the questions that are form required. This is another quick tip about these exams. You have to be careful not to overthink it, but and put words that are not there into the program. For me, it's like, okay, that only works if I'm working on the interview questions. But a Minecraft and PowerPoint are just making pretty versions of water cycle. And I think you could probably go for CLD, showing how water cycles through the environment. But for me, if you said, how does the water cycle work in your house? It might be a little bit more of a new concept or context. So question 2, if we look, so this is a slightly different way of asking the question. You have to say yes or no for each one of these if you think it involves knowledge construction. So if you use AR in lessons, augmented reality, and the student uses an app to point to the image of an in ancient Egypt, is that knowledge construction? If they conduct research into ancient Egypt and use that research to write a dialogue, is that knowledge construction? Or if they create a timeline in Excel, is that knowledge construction? If anybody's brave enough to put in the chat, you could just put the ones that are yes, is easier. A, B, or C, or A, B, and C. Which ones do you think include knowledge construction? B, yes. So you can see everyone's writing. B and C. So for me, C doesn't require, isn't knowledge construction, because all they're doing is taking the information and making it pretty in Excel timeline. So also going back to the exam, don't get excited just because they put apps and refer to digital ICT. Just because it's in Excel doesn't equate to knowledge construction. So in the learning course or in the OneNote, they do have this learning decision tree for each of the rubrics, which basically does similar to what I do, is if it's knowledge construction, yes. Is it the main requirement? Yes. Do they require to apply their knowledge in a new context? And then if it's interdisciplinary, and if you answer no, you go down and stay in that level, but otherwise you carry on to the next level and ask a question. These are not the decision trees are not given to you in the exams, and they do, for me, often explain it if you're that kind of visual learner. So the next dimension is collaboration, which definitely changes the way you think about group work. So why is collaboration a 21st century skill? Well, everything is generally done by more than one person in the modern world of work. If you take coding, it's teams of hundreds or thousands of people coding apps or programs. Even if you're talking about medicine, it's more than one doctor that does something, or if you think of an operation, all the different types of people that are involved in that. So it's the one thing that we learned an awful lot in lockdown, was how to collaborate digitally. And it's about connecting and sharing and working together to achieve something. So the big ideas and the rubric of collaboration is, the first question is, are the students or learners in your class working in pairs or groups? If the answer is no, then there is no collaboration element. It doesn't make the project a bad project, it's just not focusing on collaboration. And they have to discuss or solve a problem or create a product. In other words, they have to work together. Just because they're in pairs, and they doesn't mean that it is collaboration if they each then hand in a piece of work. The second question is there shared responsibility? So in other words, can the product or the problem that they're solving or the issue that they're discussing, do they both have to work together in order for you to solve the problem? So there is the shared responsibility for the outcome. So if for example, the students were designing a website, is there a shared responsibility to make that website happen? Or is there, if it was a set of business ideas and marketing materials, and one did the one part and somebody else did the slogan, and one did the logo and somebody else made an advert, is there a shared responsibility for the overall outcome? So is there one product that you can say they work together? These are the projects that as teachers and children we don't like, because it's when the one person goes home and does all the work. So the third question is, are there substantive decisions? So substantive means that they actually decided something, not just sharing, completely sharing the work. So it's more about the content, the process, the outcome, the product that they made. In other words, could they change it and shape it in some way? If they didn't, and then you gave them all the information. So for example, if we gave them a big, we do these at school, a big artwork where all 5 people work together to color in the artwork, and you've provided all the colors, and you say this part is red and this part is green and this part is purple. There's no decisions, they just the workers. There might be 5 of them. They might have the shared responsibility of making sure that the picture's finished at the end, but they're not deciding anything. It was all decided for them. They can't change or choose in the process. And then interdependent means at the top, to get to level 5, is, can I, once the product or it's finished, can I go back and decide who did and see who did what? So if I had a website, yes, did they together decide on the logo, the name, the colors? But at the end of the day, I know the about part was done by person A, the shop part was done by person B. So I'm a CAT teacher. So for example, if you were doing a newsletter, the newsletter overall, the theme, how it works together, the typeface, the name, what kind of ads are in it, who the target audience, that's all the decisions, all the groups together. But then if I'm marking each article or advert separately so that the individual child gets, in essence, 2 marks, a group mark and an individual mark as part of the project, I can hold them accountable for their own part. We just did in grade 9 a history project where it used to be a poster and then it was in magazine on Canva or publisher before that. Well, we did an AI one where they worked together, used ChatGPT, created avatars, made it work, made the avatar talk and made it into a news bulletin using Canva. So that meant that that we could ask them who was responsible for the script, who was responsible for the images that showed while the news anchor was talking, who was responsible for putting it all in the and downloading it into an MP4 file. So interdependent is, can I go after it's all said and done about working together as a group, do I still know who did what? So this is what the rubrics looks like in Microsoft, the rubric with the words and as you follow the levels down. And this is what a question looks like in the exam. So once again, if you look for the question, they want to know which of these activities below, A, B, C, or D, will the students be working at level 5? So level 5 means they have to have shared responsibility, they have to have made substantive decisions, and their work has to be interdependent. So knowing those 3 things, if we look at the questions, if you want to just type A, B, C, or D, just which ones are level 5 in the chat, or if anybody's brave enough to take their microphone off and say,
Could I ask a question quickly?
yes.
If at Brescia House, what do you find is an effective way to check for the interdependent work? Do you literally give like a checklist with everything and they have to put their name per item, or what works there?
So when I've done it, so if we go back to like a news article or what that, they basically say the roles and responsibilities. So for example, if the script is worth 10 marks on its own, so the project, let's say the project's a mark out of 40 and everybody gets the same mark out of 40 and it has a rubric, then you have to identify who did the script and they get a mark out of 10 and you add the 2 together. And then you identify who did the images in the background or whatever. And then that is a mark that gets multiplied to mark out of 10. So in essence, everybody ends up with their own individual group mark. But the most was the marks together is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to get them to Ruan will laugh when I say this because we did it as masters. I vet each other's and give them marks. Children are not very good at that. In other words, vet each other in the group and give them, if you had to divide the marks into who did the most, what would you give each person of the group? You know, in other words, if they're 50 marks to divvy up, how would you divvy them up and then see what they say? I don't know, other people have some ideas. Ruan, what am I leaving out? People are saying C.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
interesting. Thank you.
pleasure.
Do they wait? So, sorry, just in that example, 50 marks total, and they have to give it out among each other. Does that not? That's a very interesting idea. I hadn't thought of that before.
Listen, that was what they did at Masters. Ruan and I were in a group, and they were like, okay, so if there's only so many points to give, who would you give the points to? Like, divide them up based on how much you think. So all of those things require practice. You know, they need to practice and they need to learn that you don't just rate friends, because especially the younger they are, it's very easy to just be swayed by, well, that's my friend and I don't want to hurt their feelings. When I did my game jam in March, what I did was we had a whole list of make code games and they had to rate them on a rubric that ended up in stars. And then you had to get at least 3 ratings from people. And then I took all the ratings and I averaged them out. And the person had to just like a review comment, they had to justify. So I worked it out that it was divisible by 5. So you ended up with 5 stars, and therefore you gave so much for what it looked like, for how the game went, how it related to climate change. And then at the end, just like a movie review, you ended up with 2.5 stars or 3 stars, and you had to justify that I really agree that this is only a 3-star game. And then I took all of the ones that did it, because they were in groups, and then worked out the average stars and used that as a mark. So here's this pleasure. So here's the second question. See, I took far too much to do it in an hour and a half. Okay, I'll talk faster. So here's the second question. You have to, in this case, identify the levels in the rubric. So now I always go to the top and work backwards. So a level 5 is all 3 things being, and then I look, is there a substantive decision? Is it interdependent? Obviously, they are working in teams. And then you decide. So just as a tip, if you're writing the exams, when they ask this, there's normally the more than 2, they're probably 4 or 5 questions, and they say it doesn't mean that they've put 1 for each level. You can use the same level twice or 3 times, and some levels not at all. So the trick is to look for interdependent first. So I would say that probably B is a level 5, because they have to create a sway, they have to summarize their results, they work together. You could say that there are people who've they would say who collected the data and graphed the data, whereas a whole class discussion doesn't even get out the blocks of shared responsibility. So there is the decision tree. So the next learning dimension is real world problem solving. After the knowledge construction, this is probably my second best dimension, because I don't believe we should do anything that's not related to the real world anymore. I think that we have to forget about teaching about elephants and rather teach about what, if we need to teach about elephants, what would you do if you were the head ranger of the Kruger Park and you suspect there's too many elephants in the park? and now find out about elephants and what you would do with it, because we can't learn in isolation, and it doesn't help the learners in our class if we don't put them in the context that they're going to be one day, so that they have to solve the problem. They have to solve our global warming problem and climate change. These are the generations to solve our electricity and water problems. I'm sure there's many of you without electricity now who've also had no water. So we need to teach learners the skills, so hopefully they can solve the problems for us. So the big ideas is it the main requirement? Is it real world problem solving? So if they're not developing a solution, completing a task without instructions, designing a complex product, if it's not the most time, effort, and marks, it doesn't even get out the blocks. Then we ask, is it real world? So real world means, does it have a specific audience? Are we thinking of somebody specific in a specific context? And do we use real data? In the world of ChatGPT, it's ChatGPT's data, but is it data that actually is about exchange rates, electricity, people's preference to something? So is there real data involved? And then the last idea is, does it require them to innovate? Is it something different? They have to develop something new, or work on something that has meaning, that can solve something for their community or change something. So here is the rubric. It's called the real world problem solving and innovation rubric. So you know which are the main points: problem solving, real world, and innovation. Those people who noticed that the first two are level 5, have 5s, but these other two only go to a level 4. So in that kind of question, what does it do? Well, here is a whole story, which if we find the question is, what level does this story meet? So it's a story about the community have announced a recycling program, and people don't dispose of their waste. So now they want to create a marketing strategy that promotes a new program. Students must create advertising materials that the city can use to educate citizens on how to recycle. The teacher will advertise the materials. Okay, so here's another way of doing it, is to go backwards. So in that story, if we went to the top, is there problem solving? Is it real world? And do they innovate? Any innovation? Thumbs up for those people who think there's innovation in that. Anybody? I don't even know what other emojis there are. A surprised face if you think there's no innovation. Is there anybody out there? Thumbs up if you think there's innovation. Surprised faces if you think there's no innovation. Okay, those people who think there's innovation, is there innovation in creating an advertising material? So the next question, to get to that level that requires innovation, is it real world and is it problem solving? Well, those are kind of given, because yes, waste is real world, and there are a real audience talking about the community. However, they are not giving their ideas to somebody outside the academic context. See the little line in number 3? So even if you think there's innovation, they're giving it to the teacher to mark the advertising materials, which means it doesn't get out level 3. So you can go backwards and you can go forwards, and yes, there's no innovation for me. And even if you debate innovation, the key is the teacher's going to mark it. So the audience, it's not they are handing them into the local municipality or putting them up on in the car park or handing them out as flyers to parents. Okay, so question 2 is, look for the question. Following learning activities is level 4, yes or no? So quick reminder of level 4 is that it's problem solving, real world problem with innovation. It's the top of the food chain, the top of the rubric. So do they use their user experience and modify the user interface of their app? And if they learn about velocity, acceleration, and they make code block-based programming to write a program that identifies when an object is in motion. Is any of them innovation? Remember, I don't really know what the Microsoft marks yes or no. I can only argue the point. Anybody wants to say A or B or both are innovation? If we go back to, oh, sorry, wrong rubric. If we go back to level 3, problem solving, real world, but they don't innovate or communicate their results to somebody other than the teacher. So the A, definitely, because they're talking about modifying the user interface. But B does not talk about an audience. So even if you debate the innovation, I would say that A gets out of level 3 because they've got a person that's more than the teacher, but B doesn't. That would be my take on it. And is an interface of the app innovation? Well, there is a discussion. So that's what the rubric looks like in a decision tree. The next one is skilled communication. And just so you know, for me, if we go back and look at it, knowledge construction, I think of building all the time, and yellow hard hats and how we can achieve and build something up. Whereas collaboration, I think of the animal world and dolphins and packs of wild dogs working together, how we can work together to achieve something. Well, real world problem solving, you just have to think green, whereas skilled communication is about the news. And the reason for that is that in this modern world, we have to know how to convey what we've developed, thought about, tell other people our ideas. It is very important, and we have to leverage technology to do that. So the big ideas in skilled communication is it extended communication? In other words, is it a set of connected ideas? And then if you're like me, who's a CAT teacher, never a language teacher, multimodal took me a while to put my head around it, but that's why I think of the news. When you watch news, there's a ticker tape at the bottom. There is videos that back up what the anchor's saying. The person says, is talking in speaking and telling you what it is, and there's often writing on the screen. So there's got to be more than one communication or tool that's used to convey the message. So this is the strangest rubric that Microsoft has, because it has a decision. So if you can, it's got to either be extended or multimodal. If you say yes to either one of those, then you get out of block 1. Then it just asks a question that has no level attached to it, which is about supporting evidence. In other words, they must support what they're saying with something, and their ideas with something, PowerPoint, written work, but remembering that if it's it's got to then cover, like our history projects and news broadcasts that had a ticker tape plus the anchor plus visual images. And then if you answer there is supporting evidence, you can get to the next block. If you say no, you can get to block 2, but it asks you another question about, is there an audience? So in other words, is the audience more than just the teacher? Have you got an end person in mind? That is not, and therefore what they create has to be models on who's going to see that product. So if you are writing a children's book for a grade 2, the words you can use, you would need to understand what words a grade 2 can read. But if you're writing a story for a grade 8, it's a very different story, a different language skill set. So that's the question, and this is where it gets confusing, because if you got no supporting evidence but a particular audience, you can get to level 3. But if you've got supporting evidence and no particular audience, you can get to a level 3. And if you have everything, supporting evidence and an audience, then you can get to a level 4. So the rubric is the only one with an or in it, where they say not both at the bottom of level 3. So they have to have one or the other, evidence or an audience, and level 4 is both of those. So a question looks like this. Sorry, I know it's very small. So what we're looking for is you have to decide which level the story or this project covers. So that's what ABCD is about. It's, do they produce extended or multimodal communication, but they are not required to design their communication for a particular audience, and so on. So remember, it's multimodal, extended audience, evidence, and extended communication, audience and evidence. So look for those in the story. So if you suggest that, so they're doing a lesson on settlement areas, and it defines urban, rural and suburban settlement areas by writing sentences about how these areas are similar and different. So here is the activities characteristics. They work in small groups to find photographs representing urban, rural and suburban. So now we know it's multimodal because there's more than just writing. They write a paragraph of what they see in the photos. So definitely multimodal. Then, and there's some form of evidence because there's a paragraph and there is pictures. Then they work in groups to explain how the paragraphs and photographs support the definitions. Then they use MS Photos to create a video to explain the different settlements for younger learners. And then it says they can narrate using digital ink and add music. So if you go through all that, they're telling you there's more than one thing. There's writing, there's images, there's a video, there's digital inking, there's music. They've given you an audience, as in younger learners. So if you look at C, it says students are required to produce extended and multimodal communication for a particular audience, and they must provide their supporting evidence, which is their video. So question 2 is a bit easier. It's a yes, no for level 4. So remember, to get to level 4, the only way there is that you have to answer supporting evidence and audience. Of course, you have to have extended communication and multimodal communication. So the students must attend an art exhibition and display their artwork, and they must be available to answer questions from attendees. And then the students organize an auction to sell their artworks, the photographs of the painting, photograph the painting and publish it on the website. The proceeds of the auction are donated to a local charity. So anybody want to guess whether A or B or both are level 4? You can take your microphone off if you like and give us what you think. With the teachers of Brescia, this did much debate. So first of all, the proceeds of the auction are donated to local charity. It doesn't affect anything. It's whether putting your photographs and publishing it on a website meets skilled communication, or having an art exhibition displaying your work and answering questions from attendees. None? Some? Anybody? Okay, I can still see little icons, so I know that you're still there, some of you. Any guesses? I certainly don't think B gets out the block, because just putting a photograph on a website and putting it, they don't talk about writing, they don't talk about anything. The question, so A definitely has an audience because they answer questions from attendees. They definitely have some kind of product. It's, do they have the things in between is for me the question. Does it have extended or multimodal communication? Well, yes, you're explaining your picture. Does it have supporting evidence of their ideas? But there's a particular audience. So for me, the debate is, does it get out of a level 3? Nobody wants to comment and say whether they think it does or not. I can't tell you. It's one of those that you overthink when you do it. I'm not sure. It's one thing that we do have an idea that there might be shades of right answers, not, and so for example, especially when it comes to levels, because there is a little bit of what you as a teacher put into it. So the debate is whether A is a yes or a no. For me, it's a no, but I could argue, I could be persuaded to say yes, it is. So there's its decision tree. And the last one is self-regulation. Second last one, sorry. Self-regulation is about the rules. Yes, I think A might be a yes, yeah. So self-regulation for me is like when my daughter learned to drive, but when they were little, we used to teach them to cross the road. It's the rules of collaboration, of you as a person, and if you as a person when you go into work, you have to be able to keep yourself on task and keep going with whatever you have to do. So the big ideas in this rubric are, is it a long-term activity? So now they talk about a long-term work, and it goes back to that word substantive period of time, and the process includes drafts. For me, the key is it includes drafts, because in other places, they think a week is a long-term activity. We would probably say it's a month or a term activity, but if there is a process of drafts, in other words, they don't just do it in a couple of lessons, then it is long term. That history project that we did, that I told you about, they did in 1 60-minute and 2 45-minute lessons and whatever they did at home. I wouldn't have considered that a long-term activity. And there was definitely no option to have drafts, especially in language. You do lots of long-term. Write an essay, somebody checks it, tells you what you've done wrong, and then you get a chance to fix it. So there also has to be learning goals. So in other words, does the learner know what they need to do to succeed? Define what has to be learned and the success criteria. That is both in box 1. So if you say, yes, there's learning goals, which I don't really know many projects since OBE that come out without learning goals, you have to more decide whether it's long-term or not. The next box is about, do they plan? How, when, who, where, how? Do they have a schedule? Do they make steps? Do they make decisions about who does what, where, and how to get to the end product? But the key here is there an opportunity to revise after feedback? And it doesn't necessarily have to be the teacher's feedback. It can be peer feedback, other groups' feedback. In other words, you can give it back. The person hands it in, gives it to somebody else. So I'm a PAT teacher, as I said. So when they hand in their PATs, their performance assessment tasks, they actually don't give it to me first. At the end, they give it, we hand them to each other, and then somebody else goes through it and says, but you didn't put page numbers on, or I couldn't find this, and then they can go and change it before it's handed in for final marks. So the big key is, does it take time, planning, and is there feedback and revision? So we go back to the rubric from Microsoft. So here's an example of the question. How is at level 4, who can provide the feedback? Sorry, there's just a line here, but in the test, it could be a drop-down box. So students and teachers can provide feedback, and then feedback can be used to revise. But in a project, what does that look like? So which 2 statements demonstrate self-regulation skills required according to the learning rubric? So which of these things make the fact that there is any kind of self-regulation in here? So skilled in the software, break it down into smaller subtasks and determine how to divide the work. Feedback and make revisions, are part of a target group, and work in teams comprised of market and graphic design students, marketing. And now, hopefully she's going to answer. 2 and 3, yep, 2 and 3. See, if you keep looking for the keywords and the key ideas, it makes it easier. So once again, there's the decision tree. So the last one, which is quite ironic, sort of underpins everything, is ICT for learning. Of course, why is it important? Well, nothing in life doesn't include technology at this point. When I did this a year ago in July, ChatGPT wasn't even a thing, and now it is. So we need to understand how we can incorporate technology and use it to give the learners in our class those much needed skills of not being distracted by technology. So the big ideas in the rubric are is there ICT and is it required? So if you tell, if we go, I keep picking on Anel because now I know she's a language teacher. So if you just tell them to hand in an essay and it doesn't matter if they type it or they hand it in written, then there's no ICT and it's not required. Okay. That's question one. Question two is, does it support knowledge construction? See how it links back to the very first one? So in other words, typing your essay in Word doesn't analyze, interpret, or value or change anything about the essay that you typed. So it would stay at a level 1 if you insisted that they typed it. Whereas the next idea is, do you have to have it to create new knowledge? So in other words, if we took the ICT out of the equation, would they have still got to the same conclusion? Okay, that means is a level 3. And then the last level is whether they actually design something that they produce. And this is when the real world problem solving and innovation rubric ties in, because it's got to be in with those ideas. So if you were doing a project, if you were using this rubric, you most probably would have a knowledge construction and you would have real world problem solving. So here is the rubric from Microsoft, and here is an idea. So as you can see, there are 5 bullet points. There are 5 levels. That doesn't mean that each one of these explain a specific level. So if we worked backwards from the rubric and look for knowledge construction, they'd have to have it and they'd have to create a project, something tangible. Are there any that meet those criteria? So learning how to take notes in OneNote is not really, yes, you need ICT, but there's no knowledge construction in that because it's not even talking about a topic. If you are using a tutorial to practice loops in a block programming environment, you supporting knowledge construction, you wouldn't be able to, if the knowledge construction is understanding coding, but there is no product, not really, because you're just practicing loops. If you watch a video on how to solve problems, yes, there's some ICT, but could they have got the same information from reading a book? If they investigate loops by debugging code, and the top one, if they work with a partner and write a program. So if you debug code, you could say code is the product. Knowledge construction is probably because you'd have to not only know it, but apply it in a new context. And you can't code without a computer. The same for number 1, where they write a program, block-based environment, and they solve a problem. So for me, the debate is the last 2. The top one has authentic users and the bottom one doesn't have authentic users. So probably the top one's only level 5. And then obviously you can go through each level below. So in the exam, what happens is one of the sections is about a case. Well, there's 2 questions that are based on case studies, 3 questions that are based on case studies. So if you use the OneNote, there are some case studies in there where they have, and this is just a few bullet points about the product, the project, and if you look at the details, there's great details about how the teacher gave the instructions, what kind of groups they used, what kind of evidence that they collected, and so on. So that's just, this is one of the ones. The other one that's a good one to look at is this one called Munting Mangoes, which is about growing a seed. But the idea being, which is what happens in the case study stories, is that you will then get asked questions based on the rubrics. So they will then ask you, is it a level 3 or level 4 ICT for learning? And you have to go back through all the information that is given in the story to decide. So the answers are as follows, and it's more to understand that these are the kind of things that they are looking for. So the knowledge construction in this project would be a 5 because they have to make a wiki for their business, and they have to use it across subjects, including social studies, arts, and environmental science. The collaboration is a level 5 because the learner has a specific role, but they're essential for the team to complete it together. The real world problem solving is a level 4. Now remember, 4 is the top of the rubric for real world problem solving, and that is because there's a real issue in the community and they put it into practice by creating this wiki. So this is a particular bit like our grade 9 projects where we've worked for projects to meet every rubric as high as possible, but that's not every project. And certainly if you're only aiming for 2 or 3 or even 1 rubric at its top level, that's also okay. So this one carries on, and these are all level 5 where they've skilled communication because they have, the wiki has video, audio, visual content, and it's got a particular audience. They have planning and goals, and then they give each other feedback. So as you can see, they've looked, you've got to look in the stories for all the information and then give it a level. So an ICT for learning, well, if they didn't create a wiki, they wouldn't have knowledge construction. So the exam in the last quick 9 minutes, hopefully faster than that. So if and when you register for the exam, don't be confused because the actual exam is called Technology Literacy for Educators. If you use one of the vouchers that Microsoft gave me, you have to write on or before the 27th of July. We write through Certiport, you get this badge and certificate, the certificate in Certiport, the badge in Credily. All these resources are on the Learning Curve IT.net website that I created. And there is the objectives for the exam, and then as you can see, it's student collaboration, knowledge construction. It is all based on that learning pathway. And for me, it's very important that you go through it. There is, at the beginning of each learning pathway, there is a video that sort of captures knowledge construction in or collaboration in a couple of minutes. They were recently changed. They originally, when we did it 3 years ago, they were very different videos. Becky does most of them, and they're quite concise, and to the point. The rubrics are the most important key in the whole of the exam. So when you're going to write an exam, you need to go to Certiport and you need to create a profile. So Certiport is a actual testing. We suggest, well, even Microsoft suggests that you use it on a actual personal email address, because then those results belong to you and you can always get them and get your certificate. Please, just to note, because we've learned the hard way, don't put fancy characters in the password like @signs, because then sometimes the virtual machine gives you a UK keyboard and then the @ in a different place. So when you write the exam, you have to have a voucher, which is what Microsoft kindly sponsored, and I'll give you a voucher code, and then I verify you and put in my details, which is why when you book the course, it's actually a webinar like tonight, because we first meet online in the Teams meeting. I check you there, give you your voucher code, and then you use the link that I send in the email, because it downloads a secure web browser which locks your machine once you run that browser. So it would cut off the Teams call, but you can then leave the call. We make sure everybody understands there is a time limit for starting these machines. And we have had interesting things about internets that are not a bit slower, that it downloads in time. So just be aware of all those things. It's much easier with a mouse. It's much easier with a bigger screen. However, we have teachers with laptops who do it on their laptops without a mouse all the time. So it's really what you're comfortable with. Once the system starts, these are samples of questions. So there are things like drag and drop, where you have to, so this particular one is about the tools that you can choose for each problem. This is the question. It is very important to watch the time, because it tells you you're on question of 37, because each person, well, it's slightly different. Sometimes you get the case studies at the beginning. Sometimes you get the big blocks of 27 questions first. Sometimes you get it last. The block of 27 questions, which is in the top right, the rubrics, if you require them, are typed into the question. In the case study, which is on the bottom left, you can see there's a gray block which has the question, the overview. It tells you the learning activities and the rubrics. I read the learning activities, I read the question, and then I go read the learning activities, and I only ever read the parts in between if you need to find more information to answer the question. Some of them are ABC. There are questions that have yes and no, and then this is just a check. It sounds silly, but don't miss the scroll bars, because sometimes it looks like there's only one question, but there's a scroll bar and there's 2 or 3 underneath yes, no's. And then it is almost instantaneous. When you say you finished the exam or the time runs out, it loads, it uploads, it goes blue. Please don't close the session until you know for sure you need to close the session. We have had occasions where people have not got their results because it didn't completely upload the test. You get your score straight away. You need 700 points. Somehow they get to 1,000 from those 37 questions. And all it tells you is how much of each question was, for example, knowledge construction, and what your percentage of those questions were.